And now we go for the panel discussion. It is focused on the strengthening advocacy through an ASEAN network. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you our speaker, Ms. Pradana Rana, Executive Chair of SADINIPA, and also Chairperson of the Global Network of Women's Shelters. And we also are honored to have Ms. Ji, CEO of the Garden of Hope Foundation, Taiwan, and Sister Trace Tong, Executive Director of Good Shepherd Social Welfare Services, serve as our moderators for these sections. Please give them a very warm welcome.
Good evening, everyone. We've been together for the last 2 days on a very constructive journey, I think, a very positive journey that will take us together forward to form this very crucial network throughout Asia, which I'm confident will strengthen the movement for women's shelters, which at the opening of the conference I shared with you that shelters have very little focus, very little attention, very little resources, very little support throughout Asia. The degrees may vary, but we have these problems, we have these common problems throughout Asia. So I actually would like to, I'm very honored that I am between two great ladies here. I was just telling Sister Therese, I feel so confident and spiritually professionally empowered in the presence of a nun, because I grew up in a, I studied in a missionary school, so I am very comfortable with sisters, and I like their guiding hands very much. To Chi, because I do remember when we started the global network of women's shelters, it sounded so broad, so big, and so few Asians. So I said the voices are going to drown. What is it? How can we have a strong Asian voice into that global network? And when we shared this with the Garden of Hope, I was so happy. I did not know much about Garden of Hope, but I was so happy because I feel the most daunting challenge is to generate resources and the homework required to organize a conference of this kind. And that is where the blessings came from Garden of Hope. Yeah, we need to give them a big clap. And for this conference, joined by the Good Shepherd Foundation, led by Sister Therese, that this dream came true, that it was possible to have this conference. So I think we are on the way in promoting our very, very strong voice as a global network of women's shelters, having a global voice. Having said that, I had this session and I was looking at it and I said, it's 1 hour, and it was only my name put over there. So I said, what am I going to talk for 1 hour, And as I told you in my earlier opening talk with you, I normally do not want to prepare months ahead of the conference, So I just, in the previous session, forgive me, I was listening to you also, but my antenna was also trying to take down some points which might actually guide me with the topic that I was given, strengthening advocacy for Asian network. So I have a few points jotted down and which I would like to share with you. Not that I feel I know everything, but I feel this is a good forum to share and learn from each other, and perhaps as I go through my points, you will also remember your own advocacy programs, reiterate it, be stronger, and then we can think of collective strategies. So this is just a few points to trigger your mind, rather than to tell you that this is what advocacy is. Because I'm sure in all our fields, in the work that we do, we have been doing advocacy to some extent or the other. So everyone has experience in advocacy, so it's not a new topic at all. In these 2 days, as we were discussing, particularly when I listened to your presentations, and also on the discussions that we had during lunch hour. I really must, you know, what do you say? Congratulate the Garden of Hope for having such a constructive, you know, I haven't seen so well organized, well structured. The timing was perfect. The bells were great, you know. And then to have us working during lunch and come up with the output, we are eating at the same time, we are working at the same time, and even have a group work and have it all documented, you know, as soon as we talk about it. It's an extremely efficient conference that I have seen, and I'm sure we can learn from that also a great deal. So I would really like to thank both of you, please. Yes, the blue shepherd. So that is what I'm saying. I can see the blue shirts, yes. Thank you so much. You have groomed a very good, efficient new generation, you know, who are technically, professionally, mentally able to take things forward. So my salute to all of you. So I was just, it's not all, but these were some of the points I felt which we strongly, you know, identified as our needs, as what we want to do ahead, you know. One is, you know, where there is no law, where there is no policy, we want to introduce new policies. Where there are policies that does not suit us, or that does not work for us, we want those policies to be reformed or amended. And where there is policies but no implementation, we want to see that these policies and laws are implemented. These are some of our common concerns that we want to end violence against women, you know, so that we don't have to sit around a conference demanding for a shelter. I mean, our ideal goal, of course, is no shelters. That would be an ideal world, but we have a long way to go before we say no to shelters. We do require shelters now. There are certain very skeptic feminists who say, why are you demanding for shelters? You know, shelters is, again, it's a protectionist approach. You know, we should demand for rights. But I agree with them, but I think that is a very idealistic situation that you are talking about. Unless and until our rights are realized and we really can live a life without fear and we are confident of our security, we will need to continue to provide shelter services to those women who are impacted by different forms of violence. So that is where our conference comes from. And then the second one, of course, in most of your presentations, we said very little resources, you know, financial resources, resources to build capacity, resources to support, train staff, you know, all these, always there are very little resources. So we want to increase resources. That's another need that we identified. The third one was, it's a sensitive topic. We listened to Sister Sutisa and you know, other presentations where we say you had such hard work, it's a hard struggle, and unless and until we are empowered from time to time, you know, we share, we have platforms, and also those women who work in our shelters directly with survivors of violence, they need empowerment constantly. So I think empowerment in terms of awareness also, in terms of livelihood also, in terms of knowledge, and in terms of training. That these are some of the needs that we identified as well. And of course, we want stronger capacity. Sometimes we are running a shelter with 5 staff, sometimes we are running a shelter without a warden. Recently in Kathmandu, we had to cut down our staff because of financial crunch. And we had to ask, we had a social worker as well as a counselor. Yeah. Advocacy person, and we had to cut down to one saying we cannot afford, you know. So certain things, a counselor and coordinator was one. So these are things because we have financial crunch. So we need to strengthen the capacity. Managing a shelter is extremely difficult. It is not just catering to the needs of the client that comes into your shelter, but it is also taking into account the psychosocial counseling, her immediate needs. There may be medical help. There are so many things, and whether you are doing it correctly or not. So building that capacity, you have different roles and responsibilities, and I think in all the presentations that you made, we did outline the kinds of support that a quality shelter requires. And then we said there is no focus, there is no attention, no donors give us priority, So we need collective support, we need stronger voice, we need stronger attention to shelters. Shelters is always on the lowest list of priority. So we need that. So basically, I'm sure there are many, but these were some of the major points that I felt we together needed these areas to look into. So if you think about it, okay, these are the daunting tasks, these are the challenges. Even before you came to this conference, you were already confronting these challenges. So do you think we could have achieved these challenges if we work in isolation? No. If we work in isolation, whether it is at the national level, one shelter, this is my shelter, my organization shelter, so I work alone. And I do not collaborate with other shelters. You know, it will not work. In the same way, in the sub-region, in the national regional level, if we work collectively, if we work in isolation, we will not have a strong voice. We will not be able to address the needs that we have identified. So I think that is the reason we are gathered here, you know, today. And unless and until advocacy is required, now because now we have agreed to work collectively, but in order to achieve the needs that we have identified, we need a very, very strong advocacy. We have met, we have a very good conference report, but if we keep it among ourselves and not share it with anyone and do not discuss what we discussed at the conference with others, not only our friends and colleagues and partners, but also those we want to influence, those we want to change, then you cannot get the desired results. So, you know, this is what I think why advocacy is important. I'm just getting at why. We all know it, but I'm just trying to pinpoint for us why this advocacy is extremely important. I don't need to say this for those of you around the table here because you all are strong advocates. But largely, what does advocacy mean to us? It means we have to devise strategies collectively, not individually, but collectively, have ownership over it. You know, those are the kinds of strategies. And then we have to take actions based on the strategies that we have developed. We have to take action. And then solutions need to be proposed from those actions. Why do we do all this? It is to influence decision-making at local, we might be working in communities, at a national level, a state government, a country level, regional level, and a global level. We want to influence changes. We want to bring those policies. We want to strengthen, focus on shelters. So for that, we need strategies, planning, actions, solutions. And usually our advocacy cycle has goal, and which we have accomplished. We identified our goal yesterday, so we have accomplished that. It needs to identify from the broad goal what are the strategic issues that we want to work on. And more or less, we have identified that as well, where we had 4 categories of working areas, which is capacity building, advocacy, it's a forum, platform for learning, and networking. I think these were some of the 3 or 4 issues that we identified. So issues have been categorized. We need to, of course, go into details, but more or less broadly, the issues have been identified. And then we need to do planning. And more or less today, this afternoon, we had some level of planning. I wouldn't say complete level of planning, but some level of planning about how to go about it, to meet those actions. We discussed among ourselves, perhaps we need a broader group, and then we need a more strategic group. We want a secretariat. We discussed about the challenges we have of the neighbor, the big neighbor, you know, how do we confront those challenges? So we are on a planning stage, and I think the planning stage will still go further, you know, as the Secretariat and others will look into it, and everyone needs to be engaged in that planning as well. And then we need to take action, you know, we have not gone into that. We are still at the planning stage. Then we need now actions, specific actions. What do we do? Should we start a campaign? Should we start a rally? Should we start a signature campaign? Statements, memorandums, a delegation, going to a certain level, going to the UN, representing. So what are the actions that we are going to take? That needs to be still detailed out. And then we need to analyze the actions that we have taken. Is it really going to, where are we? Do we need to make changes midterm? Who do we need to engage? Who is a target audience? I think that's another cycle. And without evaluation, advocacy cannot be successful. So we need to evaluate. Did we meet our objectives from time to time? So I see us in the first 3 phases of advocacy at this moment for the Asian Network of Women Shelters. The rest of the process will still follow, I think. Now, because I was, I thought I should also just share a little bit of my own experience at a global level about how a campaign or an advocacy was to some extent successful. Have you all heard of the GEAR campaign? You have. How many have heard of the GEAR campaign? Okay, a few. Yeah. It's called the Gender Equality Architecture Reform Campaign. And it started off in 2006 because the UN had introduced a UN reform process. It was in the process of reforming UN so that it would be more effective in delivering its commitments. So that is when, during the Commission on the Status of Women meeting in New York, the UN meeting in March 2006, women's groups, a few of us, gathered together and we said, this is the right time for us to advocate for a separate, resourceful, powerful, authoritative division within the UN for women. UN has talked so much about women, so much about gender equality, but they did not have a separate, powerful executive body for women. They had UNIFEM. You might say they argue, you have UNIFEM, but UNIFEM